Homeless girl carrying a baby in the storm. The single dad millionaire's next move shocked. The city was alive with lights and sounds, but tonight it seemed darker, quieter, as though even the city itself had something heavy pressing down on it. Rain poured relentlessly, turning the streets into a maze of puddles and reflections. Cars splashed water as they passed, and the wind whipped through the alleys, carrying the scent of wet concrete and distant food stalls. For most people, it was just another stormy night, a night to stay indoors and wait for morning. But for some, it was a battle against the elements, a test of endurance that had no pause button. On a narrow street corner near a small, flickering street lamp, a young woman struggled to keep moving. Her hair was damp, clinging to her face, and her clothes were thin and soaked through. In her arms, she held a tiny baby wrapped in a faded blanket, trying to shield him from the rain as best as she could. The baby, only a few months old, shivered and whimpered softly, his small hands clenching and unclenching against the wet fabric. The woman's eyes, though tired and worried, burned with a quiet determination. She would not let the storm take her child. Passers-by hurried past without a glance. Some avoided looking entirely, crossing the street or holding umbrellas high to shield themselves. In a city where survival often meant ignoring the suffering of others, she felt invisible. Every step she took was a careful calculation: avoid the puddles, dodge the traffic, and keep the baby warm. Her shoes were worn thin, allowing cold water to seep in, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. She had to keep moving, no matter how heavy her arms or how soaked her hair. Her name was Leela, though most people wouldn't know it. Leela had grown up in the city, in a neighborhood that promised opportunity but delivered hardship. Life had not been kind. Her parents had disappeared when she was very young, leaving her to fend for herself in a world that often seemed unfair. She had learned quickly that kindness from strangers was rare, and survival required caution, courage, and quick thinking. Even now, years later, those lessons guided her every move. The baby in her arms, Milo, was the center of her world. From the moment she first held him, she had promised herself that she would protect him, no matter what. She had already faced nights alone on the streets, nights when hunger and exhaustion had threatened to overwhelm her. But holding Milo, feeling his tiny heartbeat against her chest, gave her a sense of purpose stronger than any fear. Every drop of rain, every gust of wind, was just another challenge she had to meet to keep him safe. As she moved down the street, her mind wandered for a moment. She thought about how she had ended up here, holding a baby in the middle of a storm. Life had been a series of unexpected turns. A chance encounter with someone she had trusted, the loss of her job, the inability to afford even a small room. It had all added up, pushing her to the streets. But in her heart, she refused to let despair take root. Leela believed in small miracles, in kindness, in moments when the world seemed to pause and offer hope, even if just for a second. At that moment, such a pause seemed impossible. The wind howled around the buildings, carrying scraps of paper and leaves that hit her face. The rain came down harder, a relentless sheet that made it difficult to see the pavement in front of her. Each step became heavier as her legs ached and her arms trembled from holding Milo. She could feel the weight of the baby, yes, but also the weight of responsibility, the heavy awareness that every decision she made mattered for his survival. Suddenly, a sleek black car slowed beside her, its headlights cutting through the stormy night like blades of light. Leela instinctively stepped back, unsure of whether to trust whoever was inside. It was unusual for anyone to stop in this part of the city at night, especially in the rain. Her grip on Milo tightened instinctively, as if sheer determination could shield them from anything. The window of the car rolled down, revealing a man in his late 30s. His suit was soaked at the edges, but he did not seem troubled by the rain. His eyes, however, told a different story. They were focused, alert, and filled with something she hadn't seen in a long time: concern. The man spoke softly, trying not to startle her. "Are you okay? Do you need some help?" His voice was calm, steady, and carried a warmth that cut through the cold night. Leela hesitated. Trust was not something she gave lightly, especially to strangers in cars who suddenly appeared like an unexpected shadow. She shook her head slightly, hoping he would go away. But he did not. "I can give you a ride somewhere safe," he said, nodding toward the car. "You don't have to stay out in this storm." Every instinct screamed caution, but every muscle in her body ached from exhaustion. Milo fussed, sensing her hesitation. She looked into his small, wide eyes and knew she had to make a choice: risk trusting this stranger or continue through the storm with no shelter in sight. Finally, with a deep breath, she nodded. Carefully, she handed Milo to herself again and took tentative steps toward the car. The man smiled gently, gesturing for her to climb in. Leela kept her eyes on him, measuring every movement, every word, trying to detect any hint of danger. But there was none. Only concern. Only a willingness to help. Inside the car, the warmth was immediate and comforting. The rain still beat against the windows, but the interior felt like a small sanctuary. Milo relaxed slightly in her arms, lulled by the sudden change from cold to warmth. Leela exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. For the first time in hours, perhaps the first time in days, she allowed herself a small measure of relief. The man introduced himself as Ethan Cole, a businessman and single father who understood the challenges of caring for a child. He didn't ask intrusive questions, didn't judge her situation. He simply offered assistance, giving Leela the sense that someone saw her, truly saw her, as more than just a homeless woman on the street. As the car drove through the rain-slicked streets, Leela began to talk cautiously, sharing bits of her story. She spoke of the fear, the hunger, the nights spent walking endless blocks just to find shelter. She spoke of Milo, of how his presence had given her a reason to keep going, to endure. Ethan listened quietly, nodding, his expression never shifting from calm attentiveness. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer empty platitudes. He just listened, and for Leela that was enough to start rebuilding a small thread of trust. By the time the car reached a nearby shelter, the storm had not let up, but Leela felt a subtle shift inside her. She had survived the worst of the night, and somehow, with the help of a stranger, a small light had appeared in the darkness. She stepped out of the car, Milo cradled securely in her arms, and looked at Ethan with a mixture of gratitude and cautious hope. "You don't have to do this alone," he said gently. "We can figure this out together, at least for now." She had survived many nights, faced countless obstacles, but never had she encountered someone willing to simply help without expectation. The rain continued to fall, but she felt, for the first time in a long while, that she might just make it through. And in that moment, amidst the storm, a connection was formed. A fragile bond between two very different worlds, united by compassion and the unspoken understanding that every act of kindness, no matter how small, could change a life forever. The shelter smelled faintly of soap and damp blankets. The low hum of fluorescent lights mixed with the quiet whispers of people trying to rest after a long day. Leela stepped inside cautiously, Milo still snug in her arms. She had never been to this place before. It wasn't luxurious or perfect. It was small, a little crowded, and filled with people who, like her, carried stories of hardship. Yet it was safe. For the first time in a long while, she felt that word sink into her bones. Safe. Ethan followed close behind, holding the door for her. He guided them through the narrow hallways, past families and individuals wrapped in blankets, past volunteers handing out warm meals. Leela felt a little out of place in this world, a stranger in a world she had avoided for years. Yet she noticed something important here. People looked at her without judgment. Here, a baby in the rain was not an inconvenience, it was a reason to help. A young volunteer with a kind smile led them to a small room. "You can rest here for tonight," she said gently. "We'll make sure you and the baby are warm." Leela glanced at Ethan, her eyes searching for reassurance. He simply nodded, his expression calm and encouraging. She realized almost with surprise that she wanted to trust him. As the door closed behind them, Leela carefully placed Milo in a small cot that had been set up with blankets. He fussed a little, adjusting to the unfamiliar surroundings. Leela knelt beside him, brushing damp hair from his forehead. Her fingers lingered on his soft skin, a gentle reminder of why she had endured so much to reach this point. Ethan watched from the corner, silent for a moment, giving her space. "Would you like some dry clothes?" he asked finally, his voice soft. Leela shook her head. She didn't want to be a burden. Ethan seemed to sense her hesitation and smiled faintly. "You're not a burden. You're a person who deserves a chance." Outside, the rain continued to fall, drumming steadily against the roof. Inside, Leela allowed herself a small sigh, a release of tension she hadn't realized she was holding. Milo stirred in his sleep, and she felt a protective warmth spread through her chest. She had made it through the storm, and somehow she wasn't alone anymore. Ethan broke the silence. "Do you have somewhere to go after tonight?" he asked gently. Leela's heart sank. She shook her head. I don't have a home, not really." The words came out quietly, almost whispered, but the weight behind them was heavy. She had spent years moving from one temporary place to another, never truly feeling safe, never truly feeling like she belonged. Ethan listened, nodding thoughtfully. "We can work on that, step by step. You and Milo don't have to do this alone." His calm confidence was comforting. Leela felt a flicker of hope, tiny but persistent, growing in her chest. Could someone really care enough to help her rebuild her life? Could someone believe in her when she had almost stopped believing in herself? Over the next hour, Ethan stayed with her as she settled Milo. He helped her organize a small bag of essentials the shelter provided. A set of dry clothes, a small blanket, a few diapers. He didn't rush, didn't hover. He simply stayed nearby, offering quiet support. Leela noticed how naturally he interacted with the baby, adjusting Milo's blanket, soothing him when he stirred. There was a warmth in his gestures, a familiarity with caring for a child that reassured her in ways she hadn't expected. When Milo finally drifted back to sleep, Leela sank into a chair, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Her eyes were heavy, but she couldn't stop thinking about the evening, about the kindness she had been offered. She had faced many hard nights before, but tonight felt different. Tonight felt like the first step toward something more than just survival. Ethan sat across from her, his hands resting calmly on his knees. "I know it's a lot to take in," he said gently. "I don't want to overwhelm you, but I want you to know you have options. There are people who can help, and we can figure this out together." As the night wore on, they talked quietly. Leela shared small pieces of her story, careful not to reveal too much too soon. She spoke of her childhood, the absence of family, the struggle to survive after losing her job, and the love she felt for Milo. Ethan listened without interruption, occasionally asking gentle questions to understand her better. He never judged, never rushed. His presence was a steady anchor in the storm of her life. By the time they finished talking, the rain had begun to ease. The storm outside was weakening, leaving behind a cool, damp silence. Leela felt a strange sense of peace. The fear that had gripped her for so long, the fear of being alone, of failing Milo, of never finding safety, seemed to lift slightly. For the first time in years, she could imagine a future where she wasn't just surviving but living. Ethan suggested they plan the next steps carefully. "First, we make sure Milo is healthy and safe. Then we figure out housing for you. After that, we can look into work or schooling. Step by step, we'll get there." Leela listened, absorbing each word. She had learned to take life one day at a time, but having someone willing to help her plan beyond tomorrow was a revelation. Before leaving for the night, Ethan handed her a small card with his phone number. "If you need anything, or even just someone to talk to, call me. You're not alone in this." Leela held the card tightly in her hand, feeling the weight of possibility. For so long she had walked alone through dark streets, carrying fear and worry like a heavy coat. Now, for the first time, someone was walking beside her. As she lay down beside Milo, listening to his soft breathing, Leela felt a sense of gratitude she hadn't felt in a long time. The storm had been fierce, the night had been long, but she had survived, and she hadn't done it alone. For the first time, she allowed herself to hope that there could be more nights like this. Nights with warmth, safety, and the quiet assurance that someone cared. Outside, the city was still damp and reflective, but within the small shelter room, a tiny light glimmered, a light of possibility, of trust, and of a life slowly beginning to change. And for Leela, holding Milo close, that light was enough to make the long journey ahead seem a little less impossible. The morning sun peeked weakly through the gray clouds, casting a soft light on the wet streets outside. Inside the shelter, Leela woke to the gentle cooing of Milo. He had grown a little, his tiny movements more confident and deliberate than before. Leela smiled softly, brushing his hair from his forehead. Despite the storm that had raged the night before, there was now a calm that felt almost surreal. It was a new day, and for the first time in months, she could breathe without the constant tension of survival pressing down on her chest. Ethan arrived soon after, as he had promised, checking in on them. "Good morning," he said warmly, peeking into the room. Milo reached for him instinctively, his small hand curling around Ethan's finger. Leela's heart warmed at the simple gesture. It was proof that the bond between her child and this kind stranger was already forming. "I've spoken to a few people who might be able to help with housing," Ethan continued, his tone gentle but firm. "It's not a permanent solution yet, but it's a start." Leela nodded, feeling a mix of relief and nervous anticipation. She had spent so long moving from one unstable place to another that even temporary stability felt like a luxury. Yet she allowed herself to hope. They left the shelter and walked through streets still glistening from last night's rain. The city had woken slowly, the sounds of traffic and chatter blending with the occasional drip of water from rooftops. Ethan guided them to a small community center where social workers could provide temporary housing and assistance. Leela held Milo tightly, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also the growing reassurance that she wasn't facing it alone. Inside the center, they were greeted by Maria, a kind-faced social worker who had dedicated her life to helping families in crisis. She listened attentively as Leela explained her situation, her voice calm and encouraging. "We'll find a safe place for you," Maria assured her. "Even if it's temporary, it will give you and Milo a chance to rest and plan the next steps." Leela's eyes filled with tears. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to her with such certainty and care. Over the next few hours, Ethan helped Leela complete forms and gather the necessary documents. It was overwhelming at first, the bureaucracy, the paperwork, the unfamiliar procedures. But Ethan's presence made it manageable. He explained each step patiently, answering questions and offering support without ever making her feel incapable. For Leela, it was an entirely new experience. She had survived on her own for so long that the idea of someone helping her navigate the system felt both strange and comforting. Once the paperwork was submitted, they were led to a small apartment arranged through the center. It was modest, just a bedroom, a bathroom, and a tiny living area, but it was clean, dry, and theirs, even if only temporarily. Leela felt a strange mix of awe and relief as she looked around. For the first time in months, she could imagine a place where Milo could crawl safely, where she could cook a warm meal without worrying about the next rainstorm. Ethan helped her move a few essentials into the apartment: blankets, diapers, some basic groceries. He didn't stay long, knowing she needed time to settle in, but before leaving, he knelt down beside Milo, giving him a gentle pat on the head. "We'll figure out the rest together," he said quietly, meeting Leela's eyes with a reassuring smile. She nodded, holding her child close and feeling a flicker of hope that had almost been extinguished in the harsh streets. Over the next few days, Leela began adjusting to the routine of a stable environment. It wasn't easy. The habits of survival were deeply ingrained. She found herself checking doors repeatedly, scanning the windows, and tensing whenever she heard unfamiliar sounds. But each day, with Milo safely sleeping beside her and the apartment warm and dry, the tension loosened just a little. Ethan continued to visit, offering guidance, advice, and encouragement without imposing. He was patient, never rushing her or making her feel pressured. One afternoon, Ethan introduced Leela to a small group at a local community center, other single parents who were rebuilding their lives. At first, Leela was hesitant. She was shy, unused to sharing her struggles with strangers. But as she listened to their stories, she realized she wasn't alone. These were people who understood exhaustion, fear, and the constant effort to provide for a child despite limited resources. Slowly, she began to open up, sharing small details about her journey and listening as others shared theirs. Ethan watched from a distance, proud but careful not to intrude. He could see the transformation beginning. Leela was not only surviving, she was learning to trust, to plan, and to see herself as capable of more than just day-to-day survival. Her intelligence, resilience, and determination shone through in these interactions, reminding him why he had stepped in to help in the first place. Over the next few weeks, Ethan helped Leela take practical steps toward independence. He assisted her in creating a budget, finding affordable childcare for Milo, and even exploring part-time work opportunities that would fit her schedule. Each step was small, but each was a victory. For Leela, these accomplishments were monumental. She began to see that with support and planning, it was possible to rebuild her life, to provide not just survival but stability and hope for Milo. One evening, after a long day at the community center, Leela sat in the apartment with Milo asleep beside her. She reflected on how far she had come in just a few weeks. The fear and uncertainty of the streets seemed distant, replaced by a cautious optimism. She realized that she could imagine a future where she didn't have to worry constantly, where Milo could grow up safe and loved, and where she could finally reclaim some control over her life. Ethan called that evening to check in. Hearing his calm voice on the phone reassured her in ways words couldn't fully describe. They discussed progress, next steps, and small goals for the coming weeks. He encouraged her, reminding her that change didn't happen overnight, but that each small step mattered. Leela felt gratitude again, this time stronger, more grounded. She had once thought she would never know stability, but now she was learning that it was possible. Through these experiences, a quiet bond developed between Leela and Ethan. It wasn't romantic, nor was it formal. It was built on trust, respect, and the shared goal of helping Milo thrive. Leela had never had a mentor, someone to guide her gently through challenges without judgment. Ethan was that guide, quietly empowering her to believe in her own strength and capabilities. Months passed, and Leela's confidence grew. She had secured a part-time job that allowed her to care for Milo, was learning new skills through community programs, and had built friendships with other parents who supported and encouraged her. The stormy nights on the streets, the endless uncertainty, and the fear of not knowing where the next meal would come from seemed almost like a distant memory. Each day brought small victories: a laugh from Milo, a successful work shift, a conversation with someone who respected her. Through it all, Ethan remained a steady presence. He celebrated her wins quietly, offered advice when needed, and reminded her of the progress she had made. He never overshadowed her achievements or made her feel dependent. Instead, he emphasized her strength and resilience. Leela began to see herself not just as a survivor, but as a mother capable of building a meaningful life for herself and Milo. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. Leela walked with a little more confidence, spoke with a little more clarity, and approached challenges with a growing sense of determination. Milo thrived as well, his laughter and curiosity filling the small apartment with light and energy. Leela's love for him became a source of motivation, driving her to continue building a life that was safe, stable, and full of possibility. Looking back on the journey, Leela realized that the encounter with Ethan had been a turning point. One stormy night, one act of kindness, had set in motion a chain of events that changed her life. She had learned that help could come from unexpected places, that trust could be rebuilt, and that even in the darkest moments, hope could survive. And as she watched Milo play on the floor, she understood something profound. Survival was no longer enough. She could aim for more stability, happiness, and the chance to give Milo a childhood free from fear. The path ahead was still challenging, but for the first time, she believed she could navigate it successfully. With determination, support, and the lessons she had learned, Leela knew that the stormy nights were behind her, and a brighter, more hopeful future lay ahead. The apartment had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Milo's laughter filled the small living room each morning, bouncing off the walls and chasing away the quiet shadows that had once filled Leela's life. She had grown accustomed to the routines of work, childcare, and community programs, yet even in this new stability, the challenges of rebuilding her life were ever present. Each day brought small victories and occasional setbacks, reminding her that progress was not a straight path, but one worth walking. Ethan continued to be a steady presence, though he was careful to give her space. He understood the delicate balance between support and independence. He didn't want to overwhelm her or make her feel dependent. Instead, he offered guidance when needed, quietly mentoring her in ways that helped her grow stronger. Watching him interact with Milo reminded Leela of the care a parent could provide, the patience, the attention, the quiet love that nurtured confidence and security. One Saturday morning, Ethan invited Leela to join him at a small family workshop held at the community center. "It's a chance to meet other parents and share ideas," he explained. "No pressure, just support." Leela hesitated, unsure if she was ready, but Milo's excited squeals as he noticed other children convinced her to try. She agreed, deciding that this could be another step toward building a life that felt whole. At the workshop, Leela was initially quiet. Other parents shared stories of their struggles and successes, and she listened, absorbing their experiences. It was inspiring, yet daunting. She realized that her story was still raw, still fragile, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to share it yet. Milo, however, was fearless. He approached the other children with curiosity, his laughter infectious, and soon the room was alive with the sound of tiny voices and footsteps. Leela's heart swelled as she watched him explore, free from the fear and uncertainty that had marked his earliest days. Ethan remained nearby, gently encouraging interactions without intruding. He subtly guided conversations, helping Leela find her voice among the stories of others. Slowly, she began to speak, sharing pieces of her journey, how she had survived on the streets, how Milo had given her purpose, and how the support she had received recently was helping her rebuild. The room responded with warmth and understanding. Leela felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced in years. For the first time, she realized that community was not just a word, it was a lifeline. Over the next few weeks, these interactions became a vital part of Leela's life. She began attending workshops regularly, learning practical skills such as budgeting, cooking healthy meals on a small budget, and even basic computer skills to help her find better work opportunities. Each session boosted her confidence, reinforcing the belief that she could provide not just survival, but a meaningful life for herself and Milo. Ethan continued to support her quietly through these steps. Sometimes he offered advice, sometimes just an encouraging smile, and other times he simply listened. Leela appreciated this balance. She didn't feel pressured or rushed. Instead, she felt empowered. The trust between them deepened, built on patience, respect, and the shared goal of helping Milo thrive. One evening, after a particularly long day at a workshop, Leela returned to the apartment feeling exhausted but fulfilled. Milo had napped through most of the day, and she now sat beside him, brushing his soft hair and reflecting on how much had changed. Her mind wandered to Ethan. She realized that he had become more than a mentor. He was a steady presence who inspired her to believe in herself. Yet their relationship remained simple, grounded in mutual respect and care for Milo, and that simplicity made it feel safe and genuine. Ethan arrived later that evening to check on them, as he often did. He noticed Leela's thoughtful expression and smiled gently. "Long day?" he asked. Leela nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "It was good." "Exhausting but good." They sat quietly for a few moments, Milo playing nearby with a soft toy. The apartment was calm, a stark contrast to the chaos of the streets that had once been Leela's world. "I'm proud of you," Ethan said quietly, not as praise but as recognition of her effort and resilience. Leela felt a warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't flattery or pity. It was acknowledgement of the hard work she had done to rebuild her life. She had survived storms, hardships, and fear, yet here she was, making progress every day, step by step. Their evenings together became a routine of reflection and planning. They discussed practical steps for Leela's future, enrolling in more advanced workshops, looking for stable work, and ensuring Milo's continued well-being. Ethan's guidance was steady, never intrusive, and always encouraging. Leela began to see that independence was not a solitary path. It was built with support, collaboration, and the trust to accept help when offered. Despite the growing stability, challenges still arose. Some days, Leela felt overwhelmed by fatigue or self-doubt. There were moments when the weight of responsibility felt crushing. On those days, Ethan's quiet reassurance made a difference. He reminded her to focus on small, achievable steps, to celebrate each victory, and to recognize that setbacks were part of growth, not failure. Gradually, Leela learned to face challenges without panic, equipped with the knowledge that she was not alone. Through these shared experiences, a subtle bond formed between Leela and Ethan. It was not romantic, nor was it superficial. It was a connection rooted in trust, shared purpose, and the quiet understanding that they were working together to create a better life for Milo. Leela respected Ethan's boundaries and he respected hers, creating an environment of mutual support and understanding. One rainy afternoon, a reminder of the stormy nights of the past, Leela watched Milo play by the window. The rain tapped against the glass, and memories of cold streets and soaked blankets resurfaced. But unlike before, she felt calm rather than panicked. She had shelter, support, and resources. She had Ethan's guidance and the growing sense of community at the center. Most importantly, she had hope, a fragile but growing belief that life could be better. Ethan visited that afternoon as well, bringing a small gift for Milo, a colorful book of bedtime stories. Leela smiled, touched by the thoughtfulness. It was a simple gesture, yet it symbolized something much larger, the steady care and consideration that had become part of their shared journey. Milo immediately became engrossed in the pictures and words, giggling as Ethan read aloud. Leela watched, feeling a profound gratitude for this new chapter of her life. As weeks turned into months, the apartment became more than just a temporary space. It became a home. Leela decorated it modestly, hung pictures of Milo, and set up a small corner for their daily activities. Each addition, each small change, reinforced the sense that they belonged somewhere, that their lives were no longer dictated by fear or scarcity. Milo thrived, his laughter and curiosity a daily reminder of why Leela had endured so much and why she continued to strive for a better future. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, Leela sat with Milo and Ethan at the small kitchen table. They shared tea, snacks, and quiet conversation. The atmosphere was warm and calm, a stark contrast to the cold, chaotic nights that had once dominated Leela's life. She realized how far she had come, from fear and uncertainty to stability, confidence, and hope. Looking at Ethan, Leela felt a deep gratitude. He had not only offered practical help but had also modeled patience, kindness, and quiet strength. He had shown her that life could be rebuilt, one step at a time, and that trust, once extended, could lead to profound transformation. She had once feared the world outside the streets, but now she faced it with courage, equipped with tools, support, and determination. And as Milo giggled and played, reaching for the colorful illustrations in the storybook, Leela understood something essential. The stormy nights had shaped her resilience, but the calm, steady presence of support and care was what allowed her to grow. She had survived, yes, but now she was learning to thrive. Months had passed since the stormy night that had changed Leela and Milo's lives. The city streets were now just a memory, a chapter she had survived and learned from, rather than a place she feared. The small apartment had become a real home, filled with the laughter of Milo and the quiet routines that made life feel secure. Leela had grown in confidence, independence, and hope. She no longer saw herself merely as someone who survived. She was a mother, a person with a future, and someone capable of shaping that future for herself and her child. Milo had grown bigger and more curious. Each morning, he woke with bright eyes, eager to explore the small apartment or play in the tiny park nearby. Leela watched him with a mixture of awe and gratitude. He had been her reason to keep moving through the storms, her reason to survive when the nights felt endless. Now, he was also her reason to grow, to learn, and to embrace the possibilities of a life beyond survival. Ethan continued to check in regularly. His presence was steady but unobtrusive, giving Leela space while offering guidance when needed. They had developed a rhythm, a bond built on trust, respect, and shared concern for Milo. He had taught her about planning for the future, offered advice on work and education, and provided gentle encouragement when she doubted herself. Leela had learned to accept help without feeling weak, to trust without fear, and to take steps toward independence confidently. One afternoon, Ethan arrived with a small package for Milo, a set of storybooks filled with colorful illustrations and simple tales. Milo immediately dived into them, laughing and pointing at the pictures. Leela smiled, feeling the warmth of the moment fill her chest. She realized how much her life had changed. A simple afternoon of reading with her child was no longer a dream but a daily reality. She could provide stability, warmth, and love, and she had someone who had guided her along the way. "Look at him," Ethan said softly, kneeling beside Milo. "He's growing so fast." Leela nodded, brushing a strand of hair from Milo's forehead. "I couldn't have done this without you," she admitted quietly. Ethan shook his head gently. "No, you did all of this. I only helped you see it was possible. Milo's lucky to have a mother like you." The words felt different than any praise she had ever received. They were genuine, recognizing her strength, perseverance, and dedication. Over the next few weeks, Leela's confidence grew even further. She had secured a steady part-time job that allowed her to care for Milo, enrolled in advanced workshops at the community center, and even begun volunteering to help other parents who were just starting to rebuild their lives. She had become not just a survivor but a mentor, sharing her story to inspire others and providing guidance to those who were beginning their journeys. The community center had become a second home of sorts. Leela was no longer the timid, cautious woman who had once walked through stormy streets with her baby. She was confident, organized, and capable. She shared her experiences openly, encouraging others to believe in themselves and reminding them that progress came one small step at a time. Her life had shifted from a series of daily struggles to a purposeful journey of growth, resilience, and hope. Ethan remained a quiet but constant presence, attending community events occasionally, helping with workshops, or simply offering advice when needed. Their relationship had evolved into one of mutual respect and understanding, centered on Milo's well-being and Leela's growth. There was no pressure, no expectation beyond the shared goal of supporting her independence. It was a bond built on trust, patience, and genuine care. One rainy evening, reminiscent of that first stormy night, Leela found herself gazing out the window while Milo played quietly nearby. The raindrops tapped gently against the glass, creating a familiar rhythm. She remembered how terrifying the streets had been, how heavy the blankets and cold wind felt, and how desperate she had been to find shelter. But the fear no longer held power over her. She had come through, stronger and wiser, with the tools and support needed to face life's challenges. Ethan arrived that evening with a warm smile and a small umbrella for Milo's stroller. "Looks like the rain's back," he said softly. Leela laughed lightly, a sound of relief and amusement. "I'm ready for it this time," she replied. The two of them walked Milo under the umbrella to the nearby park, where he giggled and splashed in puddles without fear. For Leela, this simple outing felt symbolic, a reflection of how far they had come. The storm that had once represented danger and despair now represented growth, resilience, and the life they had built together. As they returned to the apartment, Leela reflected on the journey. She had survived nights of fear and uncertainty, faced challenges that had seemed insurmountable, and learned to trust and accept help. She had discovered her own strength, and in doing so, created a future for Milo that was safe, stable, and filled with love. The city streets that had once been harsh and unforgiving were now a backdrop to a life filled with hope. In the months that followed, Leela continued to grow and thrive. She moved from temporary housing into a slightly larger, more permanent apartment, ensuring that Milo had space to play and explore. She found a more stable job that provided a steady income, giving her independence and security. She continued her involvement with the community center, mentoring other parents and sharing the lessons she had learned about resilience, hope, and the power of small steps. Through it all, Ethan remained a quiet support, checking in periodically and offering guidance when necessary. Their relationship had matured into one of respect, gratitude, and shared purpose. He had not only helped Leela rebuild her life, but had also reminded her of the strength that lay within her. She had learned to trust, to accept help, and to embrace the possibility of a better future. One evening, as Leela tucked Milo into bed and kissed his forehead, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The journey from the stormy streets to this point had been long and difficult, but every step had been worth it. Milo slept peacefully, the warmth of the apartment surrounding him, and Leela sat quietly in the living room, reflecting on the transformation in her life. She was no longer defined by fear, homelessness, or uncertainty. She was defined by resilience, courage, and the love she had for her child. Ethan called that night to check in, as he often did. Leela shared the news of her progress, her new job, and Milo's latest milestones. He congratulated her sincerely, emphasizing her hard work and perseverance. They spoke for a while, discussing small goals for the coming weeks and ways to continue building stability. The conversation was calm, supportive, and grounding, a reminder that she was never alone in her journey. As she ended the call, Leela realized something profound. One night, one act of kindness had changed the course of her life. The encounter with Ethan on a stormy night had set off a chain of events that had led to stability, growth, and hope. She had learned that trust, courage, and support could transform not only her life, but also the life of her child. Milo's laughter, curiosity, and sense of security were living proof of that transformation. Looking out the window at the quiet city, Leela felt a sense of peace she had never known before. The stormy streets were a memory, a reminder of the past she had survived. The present was filled with warmth, stability, and love. The future stretched ahead, full of possibilities, challenges, and hope. She knew that life would continue to have storms, metaphorical as well as real, but she now had the tools, support, and confidence to face them with courage. In that moment, Leela understood the true meaning of resilience. It was not just surviving hardships, but using them as a foundation to build a stronger, brighter future. She had survived the storms, accepted help, and grown into a mother capable of providing a life filled with hope, stability, and love. And as she watched Milo sleep peacefully, she knew that their journey had only just begun, but that they were ready to face it together. The story of a homeless girl and her baby, once marked by fear and uncertainty, had transformed into a story of hope, resilience, and the power of compassion. A single act of kindness had set everything in motion, proving that even the smallest gestures could change lives forever. Leela had found strength, independence, and community. Milo had found safety, love, and opportunity. And both had discovered that even in the darkest storms, light could emerge, guiding them toward a future filled with promise. Homeless girl carrying a baby in the storm. The single dad millionaire's next move shocked.